Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this weekly webinar. We're so glad you're here with us today as we present Emily Shoup, who will be talking with us about communication. We're honored to have you as our guests. We love it every week when we bring these wonderful presenters, these executive volunteers who spend their time preparing for these webinars and getting ready to give us good tips on a variety of topics. You can come every week and participate. And it's free. All you need to do is sign up for GoToWebinar, and that is free as well. And you'll be able to hear these broadcasts weekly. Business Performance, as you may know if you've been with us before, presents these every Tuesday at noon Central, and we provide business insights on a variety of topics important to business professionals. I do hear background in noise, so I hope that everyone will be on mute as we go through this and get this started. Business Performance, by the way, is a voluntary association, and it provides online business information exchange for a variety of topics. And when you become a member, you can meet people from across the U.S. who engage in business conversations on things like we're presenting today. And you can become a member at no cost and engage anytime. So just go to businessperformanceusa.org. One of the many benefits is that you'll be able to hear on demand all of the webinars that we've presented, and at a cost, at a time that is most convenient to you, including today's webinar. So today it's all about rev up your team communication. And let me present myself. I'm Cynthia Stewart, your host. I'm managing partner for Evermore Services, and our presenter today is Emily Shoup. And before I introduce Emily, let me just remind you that anytime you participate, anytime you'd like to, you can send a question using that feature on your control panel, and I'll be monitoring that during the course of the webinar and make sure that as time allows, we'll be able to answer your questions. Also, if you have a specific question about any workplace issue, just send me an email at cynthia@businessperformanceusa.org. And as a reminder, you can watch today's webinar and all others on businessperformanceusa.org. Now, let me present your executive presenter. It's Emily Shoup. Emily has her own business. She hails out of, I'm sorry, I'm looking for something and there we go. Emily is owner of Shoup Training and Consulting, and she's a training and business consulting firm. She started her career working in large corporations and universities as a network engineer, of all things, if you can imagine. So she's got that engineering mind behind this wonderful presence. She grew to become a manager of network engineers and later an associate director of technology before she founded her company about 3 years ago. And over the course of her career, Emily realized that people are her passion. She began to focus her efforts on developing not only her own people skills, but those of others around her as well. And now she's a speaker and a coach and an entrepreneur. She created Central Illinois' premier team building event, Operation Our Town, and it's a team building event that is citywide and is very, very popular. They look forward to it every year. Also, she has Lead Any Team and the Shoup Shift 6 Gears to revolutionize your culture, team, and leadership. Over the past few years, Emily has received the honor of being asked to contribute her writings to ManagingAmericans.com, which is a really interesting site for all kinds of information, and also the Unstoppable Women's Guide to Emotional Well-Being, as well as being asked to speak and lead many events in her state and beyond. And you'll find her insightful, engaging, and energetic. So here we go, passing the baton to you, Emily, and let's get the right slide. There we go. So let's see. Let me change presenters over to Emily, and we will see her screen pop up here.
Okay.
Oh, good. We hear you well. I'm looking for your screen.
Is it there yet?
Not there quite yet.
Good.
Just be sure to accept it on your end.
Yep, I did show my screen.
Well,
People can see your screen, it says.
okay, here it comes. Yay!
Yay.
Very good. Okay, Emily, it's all yours. Thank you.
See, and it's reasons like that right there that I got out of network engineering and out of the IT world. There are so many things that just should work that sometimes just don't quite work and they frustrate people. And I like working with people way better than technology. So that's where I landed. And as Cynthia, excuse me, was saying, my career has taken an interesting path, and what I like to always start my presentations with, so that you know where I'm coming from, is everything that I do and everything that I teach to my clients and my audience is all about being people focused. And a lot of times that takes doing a lot of self-reflection yourself. So today when we dive into our topic, which is communication, we're really going to focus on the people that we're working with and doing a little bit of self-reflection so that we can improve that communication within our team. So again, today our topic is revving up our team communication, making sure that we're getting the most out of our team. And really, we all know that communication is important, but what I've found is that when leaders are clearly, and I do mean clearly and consistently communicating with their teams, there's a lot less confusion, stress, and conflict. And when there is not, when the opposite happens, that's when it seems like there's just chaos. It's a high stress environment, and a lot of people are struggling to do a good job. And one of the most interesting things that I found is most people really do want to do a good job. They're just not in a position, or they're not being empowered to do so. And it all starts with that communication, and that's why it's so important for us to dive into that today. So today I'm going to keep it pretty simple for you and go over 3 tips that I would like you to remember, just real easy things that you should be considering about your communication on a regular basis. And then we're going to cover 3 tools to work on that improving your own communication, a little bit of that self-reflection. So that's what we're going to cover today. The first tip that I have for you, or little piece of feedback that I found, is that the #1 complaint out of all my clients, all the companies that I've worked with, large or small, it doesn't matter if it's a 2-person shop or a 1-person shop with virtual or vendors that they work with, or a large company with thousands and thousands of employees, the #1 complaint that I hear is lack of communication. And I've pulled this many different ways with the people that I work with and my audiences, and sometimes I ask if you think that there could be too much information, and a lot of times there are people, especially IT security people, who say, yeah, there's too much information that you can share, and there is, but I have to tell you that the #1 complaint is that lack of communication, which means that a lot of people feel like they are not getting the information they need to do their jobs. And so keeping that in mind, what I would like you to do is take a step back and look at your communication and where have you been holding back? Are you sitting on information that you meant to share to people, that you meant to forward this email, or you were in a meeting and you heard a piece of information that would affect somebody on the project that they're working on? Did you make sure to get that information to that person? There's a lot of times where we have all this information, we're in the information age, right? But it's just not getting to all the people that need it. So you want to make sure that you're really taking a step back and saying, where am I blocking information? Where is there a time where I'm not sharing information that should be shared? And remember that you're probably not sharing too much, because again, all I hear from everybody is there's a lack of communication. The next little tip that I wanted to give you is that the key to communication, there's many books on communication and all sorts of studies and lots of stuff that we could go into, but what I found, the key, what it all boils down to with your communication with your team and being a successful leader with communication, is consistency. as long as your team knows what to expect and when to expect it, it doesn't necessarily matter how you're getting the information to them. Yeah, there are ways you can improve your email styles. There are ways that you can present information in front of a large audience better. All that is true, but when it comes to leading a team, if they know consistently how you're going to communicate with them, that's what matters the most. So if you have somebody that you know is going to every Friday send out, notes from the week or clean out their email inbox and forward you all the information that you need for the next week, they know that's going to happen every Friday. Well, they know then to rely on that information because you're consistent, and they don't worry about asking you for that information if they don't need it before Friday. They know that it's going to come on Friday. Or if they know that you're the type of person that likes to verbalize more than you like to email, then they know to go to you and talk to you about that information. One of the things that I find with hosting workshops or working with companies is you'll talk about communication, and then all of a sudden people will start to turn it on like it's a fire hose. And so then all of a sudden everybody's just drowning in information. There's too much going on. They don't know how to sift it out. They don't know what to do with it. They're excited that the information is being shared, but now it's too much and they don't know what to do with it. And then all of a sudden you kind of get back into the swing of things, and your communication, all the information starts to dry up, and then it turns into a desert, and then the team is wondering what's going on, where's the information, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be communicating more often. Emily said it's important to share more information. So then again, it's a big fire hose of information. That inconsistency starts to really wear on the trust within your team, and it's really not getting the results that you need from your team. If they consistently get the information that they need to do their job, that's more important than all at once. Just like working out, you can't do all your workouts for the year on January 1st. Unfortunately, you have to do it all year long. Your communication needs to be consistent throughout the year as well.
Emily, we have a question.
Yes.
Regarding communication,
Mm-hmm.
is it important to define how to use the different channels for communication? For instance, email is good for facts, but poor in communicating what your inflection and your tone. Any Are you going to cover tips on using the different communication channels, or do you have any recommendations there?
Yes, we are going to cover that a little bit further on for sure. But if I don't hit it, make sure that I do. Um, we're going to talk about that in the what to share and how to share it
Okay,
section.
great. Okay, we'll wait on that then.
Good. But again, remind me if I forget because I'll get too excited here and get into my mode of presenting and forget. So make sure I don't forget. Okay, the third tip that I wanted you to remember, and really it's just good. These are just tips just to keep your communication on track. And the last tip here is really that your communication has to match, and meaning like your nonverbal and your verbal cues have to match on a regular basis. And um, the when I work with people and I say this, everybody says, "Well, yeah, I know that." And I realize that they have to match, but it's funny to me how many times people don't realize that their nonverbal and their verbal are completely different. So I was working with a client where they wanted open communication, but the person who was asking for it looks angry and frankly extremely ticked off on a regular basis and is complaining to the team that they're not communicating openly. But they're scared, and it's very uncomfortable to communicate with somebody who seems angry, and that person just didn't realize that they were coming across that way. They were just concentrating on something, or they were busy, but they didn't realize how much that was blocking the communication that they desired. Another person that I was working with was the type of person who would get really excited, and she found that as she was communicating, she would start to bounce in her chair and be like shaking and bouncing up and down. And I'm trying to show you, and this is this is audio, so it doesn't really work that way, but she was bouncing up and down off of her chair and trying to get the other person excited. And with some of the people she found that she was working with, that really agitated them because it seemed like she was trying to like come across the desk and shake them too to be just as excited as she was about the project they were working on. So it was a good thing that she was excited. It matched that she was enthusiastic about what they were working on. Unfortunately, it was relaying some anxiety to the other people that she was working with, and she had to remember to, with certain people, that she really had to scale that back so that it wouldn't make them feel anxious over time. So really, just thinking about how many times you your nonverbal and your verbal are matching or not matching, and the biggest place where I see this come up is when people have no expression at all on their face. Like they're just going through the motions. They're just thinking about all the other stuff that they have to get done, and they're just kind of giving bland answers. And what I find is that when you're just being really in the middle, you're not really excited, or you're not upset, or you're not really feeling anything about it, or you're not giving that vibe out to the person. You're leaving it to the other person to decide, well, were they upset about it? Did they not like it? Did they like it? They said okay, but was that a good okay? Was that a bad okay? And it just starts to spiral out of control after that. So really wanting to make sure that your communication matches. And so if it's something that you're excited about and you're happy that somebody's working on, you're smiling and you're conveying that. If you're not happy, it's okay to convey that as well. Just make sure that that's the message you want to send. Okay, so those were the tips, really simple tips that I wanted to share with you, but I find that they're really important, and because as we get going, we just kind of forget about them over time. We just get busy. Everybody's busy. That's probably the number two complaint is I'm too busy. Um, but if you take a step back and think of just those three things, making changes in those areas would help your team communicate a lot better rather quickly. So the next tool, or the first tool that I want to share with you guys today, is a tool that I started using with the teams that I work with and have gotten some really good results. And really, it's just a matter of sitting down with your team or sitting down by yourself, however you want to do it, and saying, what do I need to share and how do I need to share it? And I've done this where an individual team leader fills this out, or the team sits down and starts to hash it out. But really, stopping and thinking, okay, if there's always this complaint that there's a lack of communication, we need to be consistent. What is it that is important to my team? And really starting to dive in, then how do I convey that information? So one example that I was given was why a piece of information that somebody found that they were blocking on was any sort of feedback that they had gotten from the customers. So it was an IT support group, and they were getting feedback on the customer results, customer experiences. And it turned out that the manager was sitting on a stack of those and knew he needed to share it with his team. He just hadn't figured out what or why or how to get it out there. And so as soon as I said that, there's probably a lack of communication, he's like, oh yeah, it's probably that stack of stuff that I'm, blocking on. And then starting to figure out, okay, now let's go through it. If it's a good review, how are you going to share that? If it's a bad review, how are you going to share that? And what I find, yes, we could go through different tools. The certain things are better over email or in person. Obviously, anything that's super sensitive, you want to make sure that it's in person if at all possible, followed up with documentation if necessary based on HR policies. But what really surprised me over the years is that it really depends on the person that you need to share the information with. So I've had on my own teams, I had one person where I could just sit down and talk for 20 minutes about something, and we would cover it and everybody would be good to go and move forward. I could need to have that same conversation with another person on my team, but in order for that to be successful, I would have to write out a rather lengthy email explaining what was going on and all the details that I could come up with so that that person could ask a few questions of me so that I could make sure that I had all the right information for them. And then we could sit down and have a conversation about it. And that was anything from something that you would consider sensitive, like a performance review, or um, something you wouldn't consider sensitive at all, where it was, hey, this new project is coming. That person had to receive information in that way. And if I just tried to have a quick 20-minute conversation with him about, hey, this project is coming, the information just wouldn't get through to the person the same way, and he couldn't he couldn't do anything with the information unless I followed what really worked for him. Does that make sense, Cynthia?
Yes, actually, I can sort of relate because I don't have auditory memory as well as I'd like to, which means people will talk with me and I remember some of it, but I won't remember all of it. So it really helps for me to write it down or have it written so that I can see it and hear it, and then I remember it. So some of it has to do with our, I guess, our learning styles or our, our communication styles. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's what I found. There was a husband and wife team that I was working with, and the wife was a book learner, and she wanted to just hand everything over to the husband, all these textbooks over, and say, "Here, learn it," and then just go do it. And he was stuck, and she couldn't figure out why, but he just couldn't retain the information that way. And so, really looking at not necessarily what the information is, but how the person can receive it. And like you said, really understanding the other person's personality. For me, I will read an email if you send it, but to be honest, I skim first. So if you can say it in 3 bullet points or even a picture, I am way better off than if you send me a long document. And because normally I would skim it first and then go back and read it if I had time. So just knowing that about sending information to me has adjusted how my team members send information. Like, okay, I know she just needs the 3 bullet points, and she'll ask questions if she needs it.
Yeah,
Um,
very important to consider the audience, and especially on a team where you work together every day. Very important. I think what you're making a great point that it's both from the perspective of the information itself in terms of what it is and how it needs to be shared, and also the audience receiving it, the team and the people that you work with and their need for how they receive it. So great point, Emily.
yeah, and then when you're, even if we took this a step further, then let's say it's just what we're trying to figure out again, what's important for your team, what to share and how to share it, and what's not important for your team. And then looking at team to team communication, I've seen that be an area where people could use some improvement as well. And realizing what needs to be shared outside of your team is a great exercise within your team. Okay, what other teams are we impacting? So within a hotel company, my sales team figured out that the front desk team didn't always have the information that they needed. And then they had to go through, okay, with the front desk team, the staff changes is covered 24 hours a day. Not staff changes, but shift changes throughout the day. So how do you make sure that information gets to everyone? And at that point, you do have to kind of systematize the information, but you do want to present it in as many ways as possible, and then make sure the leader then is looking at, okay, I know this person comes on for the night shift. We have it all here in like a binder of information. They probably won't have time to read it, and this is the type of person who would remember if I just walked up to them at the beginning of their shift and said, this, and this is going to happen over the next couple of days. Make sure that you do X, Y, and Z to cover it. So just knowing that about your team so that you're making sure all that information is there and that they can absorb it then. Okay. Were there any other questions that popped up, Cynthia, before I move on?
Well, we have one, but I'm going to hold it until you get through. Maybe let's see if it applies to one of the other tips that you have first.
Okay. Again, so this is just an exercise that I'd like people to do with yourself, just sitting down and saying, what information should be shared and how can I be sharing it. And then also I highly recommend doing it with your team as just a good brainstorming exercise. What's going on, what should we be sharing, who needs to know, who doesn't need to know, and how does that information need to flow. And you really learn a lot about your team if you open up that conversation with them. Okay, the next tool that I want to give you is if you take a look at your role, your job specifically, I want you to take a step back and then write down, what do I need to know to do a good job? In order to do my job, I need to know all this information. And then what do I need to tell others? And just write down everything that I think I need to be sharing with other people. And there are a lot of times, really, we always just kind of dive into getting our job done, and communication is just one of those things that'll just happen. But what I like to do is get people thinking about planning it out a little bit more and being a little bit more intentional about the communication that we're having. So if you look at what you need to know in order to do your job, you could start to see, well, I need this from Susie, and I need this from Bob, and I need this from the other person down the hall. And you start kind of going through all that, and then you start thinking about, what do I need to tell others? And well, in order to do Joe's job, he needs to know this, and just kind of start mapping that out, and you really start to see all the information that needs to flow. And then what I like to do is take it a step further and sit down and say, okay, I work with Bob on a regular basis. What do I need to know from Bob? And just make a list of, here's all the things I need to know from Bob. And in order for Bob to do his job well, here's what I think Bob needs to know, and make that list. And then take it a step further and meet with Bob and tell Bob, hey, this is what I need to know in order to do my job. And here's what I think I need to be telling you. And have the conversation around how you're going to get that information back and forth to each other. What I found a lot of times, one, people start to think that there's things they need to know to do their job that they don't. Some people, especially people that have a hard time letting go of control over projects, or don't 100% trust somebody to get a job done, they'll think they need to know a lot of daily, minute details, but you really probably don't need to know that in order to do your job. And once you start making a big list of all the things you need to know, you can start weeding out stuff that really just wastes your time and wastes the other person's time. And so you can kind of weed stuff out that way. But thinking about what you need to tell the other person, you might not realize the information that other person needs to know to do their job. You could be completely missing it. Or you could be giving the other person, you could be telling Bob on a regular basis the stuff that doesn't really matter to him at all in order to do his job well. And now you're freeing up both of your time, because Bob was trying to process the information and you were trying to get it to him on a regular basis. Turns out I don't need to know that at all. I've seen that a lot between production and sales, when you really get down to what you really need to know that's going on in the sales area versus the production area, and really start to hash that out, especially between two specific people or two specific roles. You can start to hash out a lot more that doesn't need to be said, and then realize where you're missing the mark on stuff that really is important, like when a date shifts. How important is it to know in production that now it has to be done 2 weeks later or 2 weeks earlier? That's really important, but sometimes it's forgotten that that needs to be shared. So again, I like to look at this as an exercise that I do by myself so that I know what I need, and then start to do it in an exercise with other people, with where we're just making a chart of, what here's what I need to know, here's what I need to tell others. So basically, here's what I think I have to tell other people, and then have another conversation then where you hash out, here's what I really need to get to that other person, and then figuring out the plan for how you're going to get that information to them. And that's when you would find out that working with Cynthia, you would need to have it in writing, plus a little bit of verbal, and solidify it with a follow-up, or however that may work out. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. So again, this was one of those areas where I just found people were really skipping over it, and it seems when I present it to people, a lot of times I get the, well, that's pretty easy, but it's actually a little bit harder if you do it right. So what I would like you to do is take the time to really dive into what do I need to know and really think about that. And you can do it on a project by project basis. You can do it on a day-to-day basis. But what I usually start with is a little bit higher level where in general, these are the things I need to know. I need to know if something is not on budget or if a timeline is slipping, or I need to know if somebody's not going to be there for coverage of for support, all those kind of things. And then especially for leaders, a lot of times they don't necessarily, again, you just kind of get into the, we all are guilty of this, get busy into our jobs and trying to get work done, and you kind of forget about what do I need to tell others, especially tell your team. It's easy to think, well, I know as as a manager, I need to tell the vice president this, and I need to tell this other manager that, and I need. It's easier to look up sometimes than to look down on the org chart and say, what information do I need to make sure they have so that they can be doing their job.
Emily, I've
Okay.
worked on a lot of projects and we do communication plans, but I don't think I've ever, and I've worked for 30 years in corporate America, and I don't think I ever had anyone ever sit down and say, here's the information we need to think about. Here's the information I need. I've never done that. That's a great exercise. And
Yeah,
I
and
have
it's
never had a manager do that. So,
well, and it's always one of those where people kind of mock at it, but it's very powerful. And I started it with clients that were just, again, they were complaining there was a lack of communication, things weren't consistent, they didn't know what they needed to know in order to do their jobs. So, all right, let's map it out. Let's look at it. Let's make a plan. And I know that you've worked on some huge projects, and it's very easy to look at the tasks that need to be done on a project, and very easy to look at the pieces that I think are really the what along the way. But for me, the information flowing is the how. In order for me to make this decision on this project, I need to know this information, or I need to know that this is happening, or yeah, there's a lot that can be, especially in those bigger projects. And even things that are as simple as I just need to know that something got done, then I can proceed with my step. And there, I can't tell you how many times that little piece of information is skipped over. Oh, I didn't know that Susie was waiting for me to finish, for me to tell her. I just thought, magically she would just move forward. So very, very crucial piece of information there. Okay, the last tool that I wanted to dive into is when it comes to communication. Again, there's so many great things that I could go over. I've got tons of stuff on email etiquette, or how your tone of voice comes over email, or I always get a kick out of it. Like my mom likes to send emails in all caps, and trying to teach her that that's really yelling, and why are you yelling at me? Um, or when you should pick up the phone, or when a instant message is appropriate, all those kind of things. There's a lot that we could go through. There's a lot that we could dive into as to how to speak in front of a room and all those other things. But really, at the core of communication within your team, um, again, I just find the most success if you do a little bit of self-reflection. Again, a lot of times people want me to come in and fix their team. Well, can you make my team communicate better? And really, I can't make people communicate better, but I can help you adjust how you communicate, and therefore the people around you will start to communicate better. And the biggest stumbling block that we all run into is just making sure that we're listening to what people are saying. or we're listening to the information that's been given to us. And so I found this little comic here. I thought it was pretty funny. You know, it's not that the guy is, or I assume the girl is talking in this cartoon, um, but it's not that he's hard of hearing, which is what you would expect in a doctor's office, but it's that he's hard of listening. So he can hear things just fine, just like if you have kids. I have a 6-year-old, and we always say he has selective hearing. He can't hear a thing until it has to do with something that's important to him, right? So I wanted to dive a little bit into some listening bad habits and some communication shutdowns where you might not realize that you're kind of ending the conversation, or you're not helping the conversation move forward. Or another way to look at it is the information is not going to flow as freely if this is happening. So again, in the spirit of this self-reflection, this is a list of 4 listening bad habits. And what I'd like you to do is take a look at them and think about if you've ever been guilty of doing it. And I would have to tell you that I have been guilty of each one of these at some point in my life. So take a look at the list here, and we'll dive into them a little bit individually, but really just thinking, have I ever done this before? Or, uh-oh, I do that all the time. So the first one is interrupting before somebody finishes. And a lot of times I get a, yeah, but Emily, we're busy, and I got the gist of what they were trying to say, so I had to I had to keep moving, otherwise they were going to talk too long. Again, there's a lot of reasons why that would block somebody from communicating with you ever again, which is really scary if now they're not going to come to you with information. But are you really sure? I mean, most people that I know are not mind readers, so you don't always know 100% for sure what the other person was going to finish with. So you should always let the other person finish if at all possible. Being overly parental, I was speaking in front of a group last week, and there's a lot of people that just laughed out loud with this one, in giving advice to people, and it was just one of those things where they just kind of, well, the person kept asking me for advice on a regular basis, or it seemed like everybody was asking me for advice, so all of a sudden it feels like that's all I'm doing is giving advice, or being parental, and not really paying attention to if that's what the person was looking for or not. Um, Number 3 always gets me because I am a note taker. Because for me, in order to remember something, I have to write it down. So I find myself writing notes a lot. And every time I bring this up, I always have to step back and think, okay, even in a 2-person conversation, I want to take notes so that I can remember. But I also realize that I have to make sure that I'm giving enough eye contact. I'm paying it close enough attention to what they're saying, and that I'm not trying to write what they had just said and remember that instead of hearing what they're saying next. Because that's really where what I found the more I looked into that. At first, when I learned of that being a listening bad habit, like, well, how can that be? You're writing everything down. But if you really think about it a little bit further, you don't always hear everything if you're writing everything down. And then thinking about your reply while the other person is speaking. And I had one manager that I worked for that I always aspired to be like him, because he could sit there and quietly listen to everything you had to say, and then he would sit there quietly and think of his response, and he would sit there quietly and put it together in his head, and then he would give you his response. And for me, I do a lot of thinking while I'm talking. So my arms are waving, I'm moving around, and I'm excited or into what I'm saying, and I'm thinking as I go along. But for him, he would really sit there and let it all sink in and then give his response. I always thought if I could come somewhere in between the two of us, because it drove me crazy to have to sit there and wait and be on the other end. But I tell you, his answers or his responses were always spot on. They were always very well thought out. He always said the right thing, but he was not worried about coming up with his response until the other person was done speaking. Did any of those jump out for you, Cynthia?
Well, I am the compulsive note taker and have done something similar. In recently, I was interviewing a client and I didn't take many notes. So later, I went away and just recapped. It was amazing to me how much I really did remember. So I've kind of learned the art of quick scribbles, so that I really can listen and have eye contact and be responsive and not look like I'm having to write everything down. It's taken me a while to get there though, but I really really number three. But I'm with you. I do all of these things. I really uh, do like. Actually, I really like listening, so I like to balance that with. Uh, I like being that person that you were talking about on number four. But I identify with these. I think these are spot on in terms of bad habits that I've picked up for myself as well as others that I speak with.
Yeah, and the interesting thing to me is none of these are really malicious. It's not that you're out there trying not to listen to the other person. You're usually you get excited or you get really involved with what they're talking about, um, or you're ready to move things forward, or you're really passionate about something. That's usually where this comes into play, at least for me and the people that I've worked with. And it's rarely, once in a while you get somebody who just doesn't want to listen and they use these, and these come up in a bad way. But really, it's normally just you were really that into what was going on that you kind of forgot that you weren't necessarily listening as well as you could have been. So again, looking at your team, if you take a step back and think of, are there times when I'm doing this? Or if you catch yourself doing it, the cool part about going through training like this is now it's going to be front of mind. So the next time you're sitting down with somebody and you realize you're taking a ton of notes, take a step back, put your pen down, and write a few notes here and there. When I first started trying to adjust this for myself, I used to go into a meeting and say something to the extent like, "Oh, I always look like I'm a journalist when I come to these." And, trying to make light of the fact that I knew I took a lot of notes instead of really adjusting how much I was taking notes instead. Um, and then, like I said, number four is something I aspire to be much better at listening and then giving my reply. And so it's just something to think about as somebody comes into your office or grabs you for a quick conversation or picks up the phone. See how much you can sit back and listen and then offer up your value to the conversation. Okay. The last one I always like to throw in here because I think I've heard every single one of these way too many times in my life, in my working life, and especially with an IT background, it really frustrates me to hear a lot of these, and it really comes up in IT, I find a lot. But even in sales, even in the banking industry that I've worked with clients in, it comes up everywhere, even in the little mom and pop shops that I've worked with. So it happens. And this is a list of just six. There are plenty more communication shutdowns. Meaning, if you say this, or if somebody has said this in your conversation, you're really going to have a hard time to have good conversation or good communication happen after that. And the first one I like to put in there because it seems ridiculous that somebody would say, don't be ridiculous. But you can substitute ridiculous for crazy or, any other word. And I mean, that's kind of an attack on the other person who even came up with the idea. And for me, I always like to get teams operating in a place where they're comfortable to come up with new ideas. That's where innovation comes from. That's how people find better ways to do it than I could ever come up with, is by feeling comfortable with throwing stuff out there. So you definitely don't want to say, don't be ridiculous. That's not my responsibility. Again, comes up all the time. And a lot of times I've had people come back to me and say, but it's really not part of my responsibility. And I get that. You can't be taking on everybody else's jobs. That's not the point here. The point is that it kind of is a it's a nicer way of saying no, really, to the other person. Whereas you could offer to help. You could twist it around and say, you know, it's not really what I do, but I know who does it. It's the how you follow that up, or you know whose responsibility, or yeah, you know whose responsibility that is, or I know who could help you. There's a lot of other ways to say it than that's not my responsibility. We don't have time. Again, everybody doesn't have enough time to get stuff done. Um, and so it's how you follow it up. Is it we don't have time right now? Is it that there's more time for something like this later? Again, you want to think of how the other person is responding to that. So if somebody asked you to do something or to investigate this new way of getting your project done, and you said we don't have time, you could have meant we don't have time today. It's 3:30 on Friday. I'm trying to get out of here. Let's talk about it Monday is what you were thinking. But if you just said we don't have time, that person might write off that project as an idea ever. So you really want to make sure that you keep it flowing and really investigate what you mean by we don't have time. Um, is it we don't have time ever or we don't have time right now? Um, Again, the IT one that we get a lot, or a lot of people, I shouldn't say we have, get in the IT world is, not our problem. You see that a lot in customer service, where if you're getting poor customer service, they'll tell you that, your problem with this product that didn't work is not our problem, you're the user. Um, in IT, it's always the battle between hardware and software or other departments like that, or the it can't be the hardware's fault, it's the software's fault, and the software complains that the hardware isn't working properly. It's always something along those lines. And then again, budget and time are very similar, so you want to look at those and investigate if it's really not possible because of X, Y, and Z. And it's okay to if it's not, but really to be a little bit more specific and a little bit more clear on why the timing isn't right or why the budget isn't right. Um, but just to only say we don't have time or only say it's not in our budget really just kind of ends. And my fear is always that it stifles then the creativity and the innovation of the team. And then the last one is is one that I always get somebody to argue with me about it when I'm in front of a group. But it's that if it doesn't work, it's going to be your fault kind of thing. And and there's a lot of times I get but Emily, it really will be their fault. It really will be. I'm okay with going with it, but I just want them to know that it's their risk. And I mean that just at so many levels is detrimental to the team. It teaches everybody on the team that they're only going to want to do your ideas so that it's never their fault if something goes wrong. Again, back to innovation and creativity, I doubt you're going to get that many more ideas because nobody wants, if that one doesn't work and Joe gets in trouble for it or gets the blame, oh, that was the project that Joe came up with and it didn't work. Um, then they're not going to come up with other ideas either. And then I'm pretty sure that Joe isn't going to come up with new ideas either because they're not going to want to be the one who is um, unsuccessful or deemed unsuccessful for coming up with new ideas on a consistent basis that don't work. What you want are the people that do come up with new ideas and new ways to get things done and new ways to be more productive. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We as a team are moving forward and we'll try another way. Or as a leader, you want to be backing them up, instead of um, you'll get the blame. Like I'll take the hit for this. I think it's a great idea, and I'm going to push it forward. And if it works, I'm putting your name all over it. If it doesn't, I'll take the blame. I'll take the blame, and I'll just brush it under the carpet, and I'll deal with it. Not a big deal. So again, these are all things to be thinking about and doing a little bit of self-reflection on yourself. How many times have you accidentally said it? Because I'm sure you've said at least one of these. I know um, some of us are trained to say things like this by our leaders in the past, our management in the past, or our peers. Um, and so we accidentally use those comments as well, or it's really how we felt, but we didn't realize the impact of it. So we didn't mean to say, go figure it out yourself when we said that's not my responsibility. We didn't realize the impact that was going to have um, until after the fact. So taking a look at those, seeing where it's coming up for you, and also within your team, if you see members of your team using these, it's a good opportunity to have a coaching conversation of how it's going to shut down communication within your team. You know, if Bob's telling Susie that this is not my responsibility, you can let Bob know that, well, it's going to be hard for Susie to come back and work with you as easily as possible or to trust you over time if that's the response that she gets. So a lot of opportunity there with these communication shutdowns. Did any of those jump out at you, Cynthia?
Well, I have always thought that culture, when you think about culture, you can really boil it down into what's the quality of the interaction between people, between two people, or between, the people in the culture, in the company. And what you've got here are things that really speak to a culture that isn't as open and accepting of new ideas and of people wanting to contribute. And so these things will really impact negatively people's willingness to contribute, people's willingness to give suggestions and give ideas. So I think this is a good, very typical list of um, problems when you have problems in the culture and the interaction isn't as free flowing and quality based as it needs to be.
Yeah, yeah, and it comes up a lot in as even in organizations that think that they've worked on their culture and that their culture is an innovative culture. They don't realize if you don't clear up the communication and make sure the information is flowing as freely, you're not going to get the culture that you desire. So I'm glad that you tied it back into that because that's very imperative. Were there any other questions that popped up before I start to wrap things up here?
Well, we had someone really want to know about the fact that we have different cultures and different communication styles and words mean different things. It, so let me see if we can sort of, I guess let's start. This is sort of a multi layer question, but
Okay.
what about different regions and cultures with regard to assigning different meaning to words? How do you deal with the fact that you've got multiple cultures and you people take different meanings to words? How do you sort through that?
The quick answer to that is it's really on you as the leader to figure out how that information is going to be received from the person receiving it. So I have landscaping companies that I work with that we work on this a lot because they hire people who are mostly Hispanic and a lot of them only speak Spanish. And so when you're translating words, the words don't translate word for word either. And one of the things that they were running into is realizing that family is highly important with the people that they have working for them, and not necessarily calling somebody out as a leader on a team and recognizing that person's performance. So we had to help them recognize performance in different ways that wouldn't negatively impact their culture or the way it was perceived in their culture. Um, so, but it really just takes some digging into the people that you're interacting with and doing some learning and asking questions and finding what I've found with each. I have two different companies like that I work with, and they each have that one person that they can ask that helps them understand how will this come across? What if I say this? What do you think about this? Or even for new programs that they wanted to institute for recognition and for building their cultures. And so finding that person that can help you really understand and bridge those gaps, I've found is the most helpful. There's a lot of general information out there, but it really seems to be industry and team dependent, based on the team that you've hired. I found that it's hard to generalize that.
That was a good example. So thanks for helping me. I didn't ask the question very well, but that was a good example of a group that's really trying to dig in and understand and make sure that they're using language that is makes the most sense for the team.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, if you boil back your leadership and your communication to how is this going to be accepted or received by the other person, and always looking at it from that avenue instead of the, well, I'm the boss and they should just listen to it how I want to deliver it. That works for some people, but that's not my modality. I find that you get a lot more success out of figuring out for the individuals. And yeah, there's times where you can, well, this has to go out this way, or so it's going to be an email to everybody, and it's going to be more generic. But then maybe you pick up the phone and you call a couple of the people that you want to make sure that it was translated properly or if it made sense. Especially if you're spread out and having virtual teams. I've started to work a lot more with virtual teams, and there's a lot of cues that you miss if you aren't seeing the people in the office. One of the big complaints is, well, why is it taking this person so long to get back to me? Well, you don't see all the stuff that the other person is doing because you can't see them in the office like you normally can. So all those pieces really just takes digging in and really just getting to know your team specifically.
Well, and you mentioned one more thing, and then I think we're good. But just to say, the leader's role is to really draw out and have build that relationship with the team and the individuals on the team, and to ask for feedback to make sure that the language is understood and it's acceptable in the case of multicultures on the team. So the leader really has to take on that role of gaining feedback and having a dialogue and asking questions. And so I think you made a good point in terms of the clients really digging in and understanding, seeking understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it reminds me the one piece about leadership that a lot of people, the little trap that people fall into is you assuming that you have to arrive, and you just are supposed to know how to do everything, and then and that you also have to know how to do everything. But really, as the leader of the team, that's not your job. Your job is to understand how the people work underneath you, on your team, and get the most out of them. So everything is shifted. Now you're looking at it. How am I going to get the most out of the people that I'm work with to make everybody the most successful? If you look at it that way, you don't have to have it all figured out. It's trial and error. It's asking questions, like you said. It's getting that feedback and then really implementing the feedback that you get. And try it again and see, did that work? Did that make more sense? Ooh, I didn't get the response I thought I would on that one. Let's try it again this way. And it's okay if it's not perfect every time. The fact that you care will show up, and the fact that you're trying to adjust will show up, and that's the type of person people want to work hard for.
Well, I just
So with that
realized
being said, oh,
we have about a minute left now, Emily. We've had a good talk
yep.
on that slide.
Yep, and I was just going to wrap it up. So just remember to make sure that you are staying people focused. Again, it's not your job to do everything, it's your job to guide everybody like Yoda guides Luke Skywalker. He doesn't do it for him. And consistency is the key. Remember to match your nonverbal and verbal. Take the extra time to really plan out your communication, what needs to be said and how, who needs to know what. Really diving into that is worth millions in your business, and it'll save a lot of heartache later on and avoid conflicts. And always, always, always stay people focused. And with that, I can hand it back to you, Cynthia. Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Emily. And I just realized I hadn't flipped through. Excuse me if I make people dizzy. Here we go. Emily's going to be back with us on May 13th. Her next topic is Smooth Ride, 5 strategies for leading a strong and motivated team with less conflict. And then just to remind you, we do have webinars every Tuesday. So coming up next week is background screening with Nancy Roberts. And then following that is Like Facebook. Kenna Lewis, who is our social media expert, will be back talking with us. She had an overwhelming response to her LinkedIn must-dos. So come back and listen to Kenna. She talks from a business perspective and how to really maximize your social media. And then we have Kent Stroman back. He is our expert in fundraising, 7 keys to high stakes asking. Again, you can become a member, so we invite you to do that at businessperformanceusa.org. With that, we hope to see you back next week. Thanks, everyone. It's been a great day, great webinar. Emily, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on communication. Bye, everyone. Go out and make it a great day.